Hello, my name is Leroy Garcia, and this is BlueRainGallery podcast. Today, we are in the studio with Jim Vogel.
Hello, everybody.
Kind of a different format than being in the office studio. Looks beautiful, Jim. Your studio came out wonderful, man. Love
Thanks,
it.
Leroy.
It's a lot of hard work.
It was. My son Sage and I, or our son Sage, and Kristen and Grayson, we all put in a bunch of hours, and I'd say Sage and I probably did 90% of the construction.
Well, it came out good. You guys did well.
Thanks.
And looking forward to seeing a lot of great creative works coming out of here over the years.
It will. It already feels like we've been working in here for years, and it's only been a couple of months.
Very cozy. I feel like taking a nap.
Yeah.
So, most people don't realize this, but me and Jim have a lot in common. We are one of 11.
12.
You're one of 12. I'm one of 11.
But
He's
I am
one of
number
12.
11.
But he's number 11. Okay, so we're within the realm. How was that growing up as in a big family? You were the baby though, right?
I'm the second to the youngest.
Okay.
So basically, I didn't know it was weird, and you probably have this same thing, where when you're in the middle of it and you're a child and you're growing up in this big family, that's your normal. That was my normal, and my siblings' normal. Like we just had our own, basically we had our own, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts troops. We had our own baseball team because we didn't join up teams. We just went to the park and played as a family. But only as like becoming a young adult and getting out there and realizing, you mean everybody doesn't have 11 siblings? Everybody doesn't have 8 sisters? This is weird. And the normal, having a couple of siblings
Is complete opposite. Yeah.
So yeah, it was pretty strange, as you would know, looking backwards and thinking, whew.
Yeah, and I thought something else that was unique and parallel besides the big family, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, but is the ethnicity. Your father's German descent and your mother was Hispanic, right?
Yeah. So on my mom's side of the family, it's New Mexican, and her maiden name is Leah. I actually have a picture of my grandparents.
We'll get it
real quick, and her. It'll explain the part of the story that I'm going to tell. So these are my New Mexican grandparents. And this was my mom when she was a young lady, probably when my dad fell in love with her. So the thing was, my dad's parents were German immigrants, and a big extended family of Vogel settled in Indiana. And then he enlisted in World War II. And at that time, they didn't have the Air Force. It was the Army Air Corps. Mm-hmm. So he got picked to train to be a pilot. And at the time, the Walker Air Base in Roswell, New Mexico, had the longest runways where they would train B-17 pilots, the really big bombers. So this farm boy from Indiana ends up to him, it was like a foreign country. Like New Mexico was just weird,
really different than Indiana for sure.
And so he's training to fly planes, and my mom and her sisters, they were in high school, and the gist of it was like the principal would say, well, you young ladies need to go dance with the flyboys, because they're about to go over and serve the country. They may not ever see an American girl again. So my mom and her friends and her sisters would go to these dances at the officer clubs, and my dad saw my mom and asked her to dance, and he said he had a really good time. When he wrote a letter back to his brother in Indiana, he said, man, I really, really met this beauty. She was a black-haired, brown-eyed Latin beauty. He says, I really wowed her too, man. We danced all night. I really swept her off her feet. In fact, it went so good. Next time I see her, I'm even going to ask her what her name is. And then after that, he served. He actually survived, came back. They got married, and he dragged her off to Indiana. And she lasted about 6 months. She lasted long enough to get pregnant with my oldest sister. And
what didn't she like? The climate? Like
it was too wet, it was too green, and the sun didn't come out.
Right.
So she told him, if you want this to last, we got to go back to Roswell and be in the sun. And that was it. And then my dad became a a devoted lover of my mom and New Mexico
Yeah,
for the rest of his life.
that's beautiful. Well, the reason I asked that is I have the parallel too. My mom is German-Irish descent, and then my dad is Hispanic, but it's kind of reverse. But the stories that we get out of northern New Mexico or from New Mexico are pretty good. Where did you develop your storytelling? Where did you learn of all the cultural stories, the dichos and stuff?
A lot of it comes from my family. Like my mom was a natural storyteller, and my granddad, her dad, like I never knew my other grandparents because they were gone before I ever was born. But he was a natural storyteller, slow, deliberate, very proud New Mexican. He made that erroneous thing about telling us, you have Spanish blood in you, not Mexican. And
Oh yeah.
we all know how that goes. But we grew up in a neighborhood where we could go down and see our grandparents at their house. And so they had there was a propensity to tell stories. And for me, it's like a visual representation of trying to get the story across.
Yeah, in your paintings.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I knew early on that I was always going to be an artist, like as a child. And my language was drawing, and so that adapted into.
So did you start off as a doodler like everybody else?
No, I started off as a feverish artist.
Right off the bat?
Yeah, and I don't personally remember this, and this is part of the thing about being in a big family, which maybe you, as an elder of the family, you set this tone, but see, as a recipient, a younger child, so the older siblings always carry the memories. And they would say, well, when you were little, and they would say this. And so I absorb these memories about myself, but I don't necessarily remember them. But the memory is, they would say, we'd all be outside playing. Like all the kids are outside and we're just playing in the yard, and bikes going up and down the sidewalk and rolling around in the grass. And then you would jump up and run in the house and grab some paper and a pencil and start drawing, because like you would get an idea or get inspired, and I'd have to go draw like a cowboy or a ostrich with its head in the sand, or some goofy thing like that. And later on, elementary school and stuff, I do remember like that's what I always wanted to do. And apparently it just started from pre-memory for me, that it was just always needing to draw. And the way I feel about it now, and I think it carried over from then, is I get these things in my head, like either it's just a concept, or maybe I see something out here that sparks a composition. And until I can sit down and draw it and get it out of my head, it rattles around in there. And I think that was like the little kid, we're playing and it's like, oh, I got to go in real quick. It's almost like having the urgency to go to the bathroom. And you run in, and I would get it out of my head, and then I could move on. And that's kind of how I even operate today. Like ideas spin in my head, and then when I get them somewhere, I go over and I get the sketchbook out.
So you have developed stories, or you got into storytelling as a family. How did moving to northern New Mexico, in particular Dixon, have a say in your storytelling?
I was really fortunate to make friends with older people, elders, and
like the ones who know all the stories.
Viejos and viejas, and kind of the way it worked out, they were probably happy to see one friend of mine, Mr. Diego, who was also our son's basketball coach. He had coached like 3 generations of northern New Mexico kids in basketball. But he was the mayordomo on our acequia. And he's like, you work at home?
What's an acequia?
Acequia is the irrigation system that runs through the valley. And
System
everybody...
of ditches, right?
Yeah, it's like irrigation ditches that they have a point off of each little river where they feed water into the ditch.
And that's where the mayordomo comes in.
Yeah, and the mayordomo is the ditch boss. And it's his responsibility to make sure the water flows for all the people that have rights to the water can water. And when it gets bad and there's not enough water, he's also the one that has to listen to everybody fight and argue and throw things. And the thing with Mr. Griegos, he figured out pretty quick. He's like, oh, Jim Vogel works for himself. So whenever there was like a beaver dam that needed breaking, or any reason to shut down the water and go fix a hole from a gopher or something, he would come by the studio and he's like, can you help me? And I was like, yeah, sure, I can help you. Because also it served me, because we would walk the ditch together and he would tell me how the system worked and about his experiences. He would point out who maybe would remain nameless, but they steal water. He would point out, like where the gopher problems were always going to be, and just talk about that.
So the stories from Mr. Griego started coming in?
Yeah, and just the fortunate opportunity I had to have my studio in the old plaza area of Dixon, in the old Catholic school building. Mm-hmm. So I was able to walk to the studio at that time.
That's kind of a little city center of Dixon, isn't it?
Yeah, there was the Catholic buildings, like the church and the old convent and the old school and parish hall, and also the senior citizen center. It was right outside my window. So I could be working in my studio and I'd see all the old people gather for lunch and start hanging out. And there was always, they were always in the Rey Solana. They were always out in the sun, soaking the sun up before it was time to go eat. And some of them were curious enough to wander over and come in the studio and see what I was doing. And then,
so you'd get those old schoolboy stories of getting smacked down. And,
they would point at the Vigas and they'd say, if you climb up there and you look on the top side, I have my initials up there. But one of the other people that was really important early on and until he passed was he was kind of the village clown. His name was Gonito Sanchez. And Gonito was only about 4 foot 10 inches tall, and he was a veteran of the Korean War. He didn't speak English until he got drafted, and then he had to learn English in the Army. And he was just full of story. He was a town drunk. When it was okay to call somebody a wino or a drunk, he was a town drunk. And he had sobered up, and he was just always full of stories. And the thing about Gonito was, no matter if I was painting a man or a woman, he'd come in and he'd go, oh, that's me, huh? That's me in there. And sometimes it was, and sometimes it wasn't. And I would still just, yeah, Gonito, that's you. He goes, oh, I could tell.
How was tell me about the influence of the Santero, or the traditional Spanish art here. How did that affect you?
So again, an old man, this friend of mine, he became a friend of mine, Eddie Johnson.
Or Johnson? He passed away recently,
He
right?
passed away this year. Yeah. He was a carver, and he grew up in Velarde. He was born down in Velarde, which is like 10 miles away. And just a fantastic artist, fantastic carver. And what he loved to do, he moved to California and lived there, but he would come out to New Mexico every summer in his grandmother's house and see all his cousins and friends. And he was real gregarious. He could just walk up to anybody and become their friend. And one day he just came to the old Catholic school building. He's like, what are you doing in here? Who are you? What's going on in here? And so I showed him what I did, and he happened to have a bulto, a carving that he was working on in his truck, and he brought it in and showed me, and we just became fast friends. And then he invited me to carving sessions that he would have at his little house. And he would invite, like a dozen of the Santeros, local guys from, northern New Mexico, and they would bring whatever piece they're working on, and they would just carve in his patio, and he'd cook up hot dogs and serve beer. And usually I would just draw. I would draw these guys working, and they would just shoot the breeze and
some more stories, huh?
Yeah, gossip about the Spanish market people, clientels, and participants. And
that explains how I was. When Eddie used to come and visit us at the LA Art Show. I'm like, what the heck are you doing in California?
Yeah.
Every year at this, I didn't realize he lived there.
Yeah. And Eddie had this big old head of white hair, so you could see him coming a mile away because nobody looked like Eddie Johnson.
Yeah.
A funny thing so his mom, when he was a child, they moved to California. And from what I understand, I think his mom married a man named Johnson. He got adopted by him. And as an adult, older, like retired adult, he came back to New Mexico. And he met this guy here that had a real similar style as his, carving. And it looked really almost like they were copying each other. And it was this, for New Mexico, a very famous santero named Horacio Valdez. Mm-hmm. And Horacio, his collections are in museums, and Eddie was like, man, we're really similar. They were even wearing like the same crucifix on a gold chain the day they met. And they start talking, and in a classic northern New Mexico way, they figure out they were half brothers.
Oh my gosh.
And shortly after that, they just started to get to know each other, and Horacio passed. His son-in-law, Jacob, who was another santero that lived here in Dixon, my age, and we would visit, and he is an amazing carver, and he kind of helped me. He pushed me a little bit to pick up a knife and carve. Eddie insisted I carve, and that's why now
You look
on
at
some
things,
of my pieces.
You look at things more three-dimensionally at times
Yeah.
now because of that, right?
Yeah, and then on some of my pieces, like the Golden Catch that we just completed, that you just found a home for, there's a little golden trout on top that I had carved, and Kristen gold leafed it, and we mounted it on the frame.
Yeah. I think when I think about you, Jim, I think about a cultural preservationist, because a lot of scenes of northern New Mexico that you're painting are scenes that I relate to as a child, but they're disappearing quick.
Yeah.
And it's probably because of the stories you're getting out of the valley, and
Yeah.
and the participation with the Hispanic culture in particular here in the valley. But that's pretty cool stuff.
Thanks. I like to think of it, I've been told that like some of the stuff I paint is nostalgic.
Mm-hmm.
And nostalgia isn't necessarily a healthy perspective.
Right.
It's taking the past and painting it all happy and forgetting the hard part. Mm-hmm. And so what I like to think is I don't paint nostalgia. I try to paint what could be a universal truth that's still here, but it might be cloaked in a past time.
Right.
And so like a lot of the stuff that has to do with like the landscape and the acequias and watering and growing food here, people might think that that's a bygone era, but if you look close,
It's still going.
it's still happening.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still people, like our friends and neighbors that take their produce from here down to Santa Fe every Saturday and actually make a living at Santa Fe Farmers Market right next to BlueRainGallery.
Isn't that amazing? That's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing. I so grew up with that culture. My grandfather was a mayordomo, and we did all that irrigation of all the alfalfa pastures and raising our own food and have appreciation. In fact, the first painting I ever bought from you was Seasons of the Acequia.
Oh yeah.
It was a smaller one. It was the study to the big one. And,
Yeah.
But it so reminded me of culturally how I was raised. And
Yeah.
it's one of my favorite paintings. Hangs
Thank
by my
you.
room.
I like that, the concept in that one too of like it's a sequential thing, showing time passing with
Yes.
the flow of the water through the ditch and the lack of the water in the ditch and how
Yeah.
it gets there. And,
A beautiful painting.
well, I'm glad it's in your collection.
I have some good pieces of yours. Let's talk about the word collaboration as it pertains to you.
Okay. I do everything myself. No, just kidding. The collaboration, the most prominent one, and that comes out of here, is between Kristen, my wife, and I. And it stems from like when I initially wanted to start painting again. And we could get into that origin story later about coming back to painting. But I initially thought, I don't paint, I don't see in squares and rectangles. I'm not going to paint in squares and rectangle. So initially, remember, like my paintings were irregular shapes,
asymmetric,
and I worked with the composition to get the shape of the panel. And
so would you construct the panel first and then think about the shape? Or
I would do the drawing first and develop where the lines should go, and then hand that off to a woodworker that would make the panel and the frame for it, because you take a curved panel to a frame shop and they can't frame it.
Yeah, it has to be custom.
So it has to be somebody, somebody that solves problems rather than just puts a box on. And then Kristen and I started talking about it, and Kristen was doing her thing with like salvage art, taking old architectural remnants and putting them together into a new
like old
piece.
ceiling tiles,
old
frames,
ornate panels, ornate trim pieces. And she would make sconces or baskets that are actually big steel tin baskets. So the idea of like not letting the rectangle constrain my painting, and I want my painting to flow, then it became more of, we would like the frame to be a part of the painting, help tell the story of the painting, help reinforce the composition, more so than this very slim, contemporary, like non-frame.
Right.
And Kristen was up for the task. Like she just would see, she would see potential like gold in a piece of wood that we'd find in the arroyo. And so consequently, when you pull up here to the studio, you see like a lot of piles of things, piles of rusty stuff, piles of stacks of old wood, broken furniture.
Seems like a common theme around here with a lot of artists that think about Nicolas.
Yeah, Nicolas. He's got way more resources than us. You might call it a junkyard. He wouldn't, and neither would I.
Yeah.
We've traded junk before. So it kind of transformed from worrying about the shapes being part of the composition to how do we take the image and not just contain it within something, but expand the idea into something that contains it. The frame becomes a part of the composition.
I noticed you found a couple old lamps and then created panels to fit in where the glass panels would be. If you get a chance, go to the website and look under Jim Vogel. You'll see some really cool things of what he's talking about.
Doing those lanterns was, even though they're flat panels, it became a 360, a three-dimensional composition.
Pretty cool.
And again, you have to think, I had to think all in the round rather than just flat.
Yeah.
But we pick stuff up and hold on to it until it becomes part of the frame.
Well, what I see in the both of you, you're both refined. Kristen's knowledge of materials and how to bring out the beauty of through the old is amazing.
Thank you. And you may have planned on asking me this, but I'll answer it without the question. Because people ask, what comes first? The frame thing? Like, does Kristen tell you what the frame's going to be, or do you tell her what the piece is going to be and what colors? And it has actually now become both ways, where sometimes she'll find something and she go, this would be pretty cool for something. Like, not even saying what the topic is, but we need to save this.
Right.
And sometimes it sits around for years. And like with the Golden Catch, I knew I wanted to do a painting of the Box Canyon secret fishing hole where we go. And initially I thought it would be flat. And she had this 3-sided mirror frame, antique frame, probably for 6 or 8 years. And when I told her I was going to do the Golden Catch, she's like, I know what we need to do. And she goes to reach for this frame, and then I like click, I know what she's going to say, because the sides of the frame, the two side like panels make a box canyon. And that was one of those times where all of it, like there wasn't the frame was there before the painting. But in talking about it, we both like came to this point that that's going to be it.
Well, we're excited for more years of this because this last show was really fun. And,
Thanks. I feel like it was the first show to come out of this studio.
mm-hmm.
In fact, we finished building this studio in the middle of August. We actually moved in without our final
Permits.
inspection, and we couldn't wait because we had a show scheduled at the end of October, and I had pushed it back. I told you, Leroy, it's like,
I know.
I need another month.
I tried not to bother you at all. Just give you the space you need.
And I kept telling myself and Sage, it's like, we're working on it, like the physical structure in June. I'm like, we'll be done by the end of July and I'll have plenty of time. And then obviously it's not going to be the end of July, and then it's into August. And then we just had to hit the ground running. So those 10 pieces for that show came out of here.
Right on.
Like we finished August 14th and we started working August 15th inside. And it was great. And then a week or two later, the inspector comes by, and instead of inspecting the place, he was like, "Oh, what are you working on?" And "Oh, this is great." And he got to get a little preview of the show.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. And speaking of collaboration, tell me about how it was working with your son on developing the ideas behind the circus series that you had.
Yeah, that
In fact,
was...
tell us the whole story of the circus
Okay.
as well.
So I'll try to make it pretty short because I could talk for a long time about it. But early on, quite a few years ago, because we did the first Dr. Alosio,
Was it 4 or 5?
4 or 5 years ago. So prior to that, I had done a couple of little pieces. There was a weird music box. It was a cigar box that I painted this weird character on, and I called him Dr. Alosio. And I was literally spelling out crazy, loco, L-O-C-O. And I just thought it was funny. And it turns out that el ocio is actually like an archaic Spanish word for recreational time. But not just like sit around not doing anything, but like storytelling. Particularly like having a drink and telling a story about something. And it's like, well, holy crap, that's Dr. Alosio. That's what he does, is he tells stories and gathers stories, and he takes other people's stories and incorporates them. And our son Sage, who is a natural born writer, and he actually worked at it very hard too, he liked like that seed of this idea of this kind of a master of people's stories. Like he doesn't necessarily have his own story, and he doesn't want one. He wants to take yours and incorporate it into his bag of stories that he travels the world with. So what's the best way to do that? Well, you have a circus. And then that gives you the cover. You get to travel the world with your show that everybody wants to come and see, and while you're doing your show, you kind of harvest from people and you take from them what you want. And he's this universal, like, he's not a bad person, he's not a good person. He's just kind of a mixer. He likes to make things happen. So when we conceived the idea of doing a circus show, and you'll remember this, I had big plans, and it was a great show. And the story developed, and Sage had the skeleton of the story, the outline of it, but it wasn't fleshed out to a complete story.
So this is the first show.
The first show.
Yeah.
So we did all the pieces we could do, and they were great. And it was one of the earlier times where Kristen and I collaborated on the framing, where we took that sensation of being on a sideshow and built frames around that.
Yeah.
And we depicted parts of the circus story. And the show was great. When we went to the gallery, went to Blue Rain, and at that time you were on Lincoln Street. Mm-hmm. We had jugglers, we had tumblers, we had
People
stilt
on stilts,
walkers.
yeah.
And picture that inside the gallery with a multi-$1,000 Preston Siegel Terrier on a pedestal right here, and there's a guy doing tumbling, right, and flying in the air and juggling right there. And
Well, you know, not one piece was broken.
not
so we're
one
good.
piece was
That
broken.
was-
And I think he sold almost every piece of the circus show.
yeah.
And,
Oh, great hit.
and that was the first round, and I was exhausted from it. And so it took a couple of years, and Sage kept working on the story. And he went to Spain and taught English there, and I worked on a couple other shows. Kristen and I did shows in between, but we were still developing because it was such a rich visual story. There were more things I wanted to paint. And so this last year, 2019, we decided we were going to bring Dr. Alosio back and finalize the show. And Sage's story was fleshed out, really solid, and
ended up in print.
He did a short run of a well-illustrated story, fantastic illustrations, compliments of his father.
I think that little short run sold out pretty quick.
Yeah. So he's learning to, like, he wants to refine it even more, edit it, find a publisher to put it out there once he feels comfortable with the polish. There'll be fantastic full color illustrations again in there.
Good thing he has connections.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And Dr. Alosio still lives. He's out there somewhere on the train tracks.
In some of your works, I've also noted you always have a line, at least that I interpret, that's based on faith. Maybe not exactly pertain to the Catholic religion, but on faith. And I say that because a few of the paintings I have of yours in my collection are all faith-based. In fact, 3 of them are. I have the Stations of the Cross, and a couple other scenes. I have the first family where they're kneeling at, during Mass.
In the church,
And those have always been really strong to me. Did you develop those type of ideas more here in northern New Mexico, or how you were raised at home?
It's both. So no surprise once you find out that there's 12 children in a family, they're probably Catholic or
Mormon.
They're Mormons.
Yeah.
So we were raised Catholic, and there's just no way of escaping the influence of the faith you're raised in. And I'm not saying you have to escape it.
Right.
But it comes to the point, and the way I describe myself is that I'm culturally Catholic. And in the sense that it influences the way I see certain human elements. And then because I'm in northern New Mexico, and because I love New Mexico, and I'm a jealous New Mexican, like I talk about it, like where New Mexico's kind of like my mom, and I'm a jealous son. And sometimes I think certain people don't deserve New Mexico, but they're here and we welcome them anyway. But that also has, so it's that the Catholicism laid on top of the New Mexicanism, plus my individual take on things. Because I'm pretty sure I have a better view than maybe some other people. Like that's just I have enough ego that I say that.
It seems like faith is disappearing. So if anybody's capturing it, I pay attention.
Well, so then it's a touchy thing, people's religion or faith, because what I think, and this is what I try to do, is it may look like I'm painting Catholic New Mexico, but what I hope is it's a universal need in humanity to have a belief in something greater than us.
Yeah.
So if I do my job right, it doesn't matter if it's the interior of an old New Mexican church or if it's outside along a great, river, compelling somebody to connect to it, even though they may not personally experience a Catholic Mass or walking the valleys of northern New Mexico.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you've outlined the core, which is faith, and that transcends all religions, and that's actually the common tie.
And I hope that it's universal.
Yeah,
I believe it is, and it's important whether you believe in.
The reason I asked that is growing up in New Mexico, and I don't know if it was like this for you growing up in southern New Mexico, but believe it or not, in kindergarten all the way through second grade, we were taught all the Catholic stories and the songs and stuff in school, in public school.
In public school.
In public school. And or at least they'd bring in people to give us like story hour and stuff, and so we'd get those stories. And I was wondering if you had any influence like that as well, or have any memories of that.
No, not in the public school. The funny thing is, all of my siblings up to me at least started and a great part of them finished school in the Catholic school.
Like catechism or?
Well, no, catechism, but a Catholic school.
Oh, a Catholic school. Okay.
Yeah. So my parents enrolled all the kids in St. Peter's Catholic School. And some of them, you know, my older siblings, they went K through 12. And then when I was supposed to start, the school, the Catholic school was shutting down. And I kind of joke, I don't really know if this is true or not. I didn't go to kindergarten. And I think probably what it was is there wasn't enough kids to have a new kindergarten class at St. Peter's. So they just skipped it. But I joked that it's like my mom looked at me one day and said, "How old are you?" And I said, "I'm 5." And she's like, "Oh, you should be in kindergarten." She goes, "Oh, that's okay. Well, we'll just wait till next year and start you in first grade." So I started first grade at the public school that was only a block from our house. And you got to imagine like the Catholic kids walking past the public school to go to the Catholic school like 6 blocks away. And all the stories about public school is bad, you know, like, and we're talking about like what, third graders are going to knife you. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
But just this idea that like Catholic school is a safe zone, public school is open for interpretation. Yeah. So I was the first Vogel kid to start public school, and I did fine.
I think you turned out okay.
Yeah.
I think your mom made a good choice.
Yeah. So we did still go and then at that point they had catechism, or we called it CCD, and it was Sunday school, and we suffered through that. The one thing I actually remember about this, which is totally unrelated, is that we're in the old classrooms of the school that they shut down. And so it's almost like they just walked away and just left the stuff there. Well, there was a newspaper sitting there on one of the desks, and the headline was, "Nixon is impeached." And had I had a presence of mind to grab that newspaper,
save that.
I could have put it on eBay.
Yeah. Well, what's ironic is you ended up from one school to another one over here in Dixon, right?
So another Catholic school that had shut down. And
one last thing we want to cover, I think, because Jim's right, we could go on for days with stories of northern New Mexico or influences. The development of your style of painting. Now, let's start here. Where did you and Kristen meet?
Okay, we met at the Colorado Institute of Art in Denver.
And what were you studying?
Graphic design. So it was a commercial art school. It was like a trade school for learning to do graphic design and commercial illustration. And the reason I was there is because, like I said, I always knew I wanted to be an artist. Like pre-memory, I am going to be an artist. And through getting up in the later years in high school, you know, people are like, well, that's cute, but you also you should have a job. You need a career. Like being an artist is nice, but you need a career. And growing up in Roswell, there were examples of thriving fine artists. You know, Peter Hurd, his wife, Henrietta Wyeth, Luis Jimenez, this fantastic sculptor. There was the Artist in Residence program where professional artists from all over the world would come to little Podunk, Roswell to work. But I still bought into that thing. It's like, yeah, art's cute, but you need a job. Well, the closest career I could think would be graphic design. So went there, met Kristen. It was the best part of going to that school. Learned the trade, you know, and then when we came out, we moved to Dallas with a friend of ours and worked within the design field. I've worked for small firms that would do graphic design for like professional sports teams and real estate development and package design, you know, like, oh, we've got this new lotion, what is it supposed to look like? And I did fine, like I did well. I applied my talents to that, but I was always dissatisfied. And then Kristen is pregnant with our first child. And I realized it's like, I need to keep painting. I need to start painting again just for my sanity. Like doing this commercial art doesn't satisfy myself, it satisfies a client's need. So I started painting in the evenings or on weekends. And I actually remember this, and maybe Kristen doesn't know this until she watches this podcast, but there was a time she left the house, it was probably a Saturday, and Grayson, so we had our first son, and he's super active from the beginning. And I wanted to get a little work done on a painting, but Grayson woke up from his nap. And I had him on my hip, and I thought, well, I'll just finish what I'm doing. And I lean over to my palette, and I have cadmium yellow, which is poisonous, like that's heavy metal. And I'm like this with Grayson, and I'm dabbing cadmium yellow on my brush, and I look over, and he's got cadmium yellow in his little tiny fist, because he's scraped it off of the painting. And he's like this, with just yellow squirting. I'm just like, oh, all I can see is like a little kid. Just, so I get his wrist, and I run, and so averted that, heavy metal poisoning of our oldest son.
Yeah.
But I just kept painting in my spare time. And then in the meantime, we moved back to Colorado to be close to her parents. Our second son, Sage, is born. We want them to be close to their grandparents. And I keep working within the design field. And I get in with this really great firm, Vermilion Design, and a great boss, Bob Morehouse. And we work well together, and we have great clients, a good mix of commercial clients and nonprofits that he has brought together. And I'm doing great, and our family's growing, and I'm on track, right? Like I'm on the right track. I have a career that I'm succeeding at, and our children are healthy, and we're fortunate enough that Kristen could stay home and raise the kids, because she was also in design. And we chose to have one of us stay home. And the reality of, the times and now is that the man is going to make more money doing the same job. And she's a better full-time parent than I am.
She has skills.
So she's staying at home with the kids, but I keep painting and entering little shows on the side, group shows in Colorado, and just to keep my sanity. And then my boss offers me a partnership. He says, we've worked well for years together. This is going well. At that point I was like the art director, not just the designer. I was helping other graphic designers do a good job, I hope. But anyway, it was going well. And I was really good at being a commercial artist. And he offered me the partnership. And I go home and I tell Kristen, and we talk about it. And it's like, that's the responsible thing to do. And it's like, yeah, it is. It's like, at that point, it's the next step to take. And so I go back and I tell Bob, all right, we're going to accept. And he's like, great. He's so excited. I'm not excited. I actually feel like this bad pain in my gut. And Kristen sees it, right? She knows. And she says, well, what do you really want to do? And I'm like, I want to paint. I just want to paint, and I want to go back to New Mexico and raise our kids here and do what I want from my heart. And the way I thought of it is, I can work a year in graphic design and do some good work, but I'm creating garbage, basically. I create a box for this widget that looks good to get you to buy the widget, and they print 50,000 of those boxes, and they all go in the trash in the end. Or I could do a painting and spend the same amount of time on one painting. And if it's good enough, somebody will buy it enough to give it a home and love it and take care of it forever. And so when Kristen and I went to meet with Bob to talk about how to form a partnership, I said, instead of the partnership thing, what I'd like to do is quit. But I want to quit in slow motion. So I want to cut back
like
a day.
Transition.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And have 1 day a week at home. And then I'll take 2 days a week and paint. And he was gracious enough and knew that was what I needed to do, that he helped accommodate that to happen.
Glad you brought that up.
Me too.
Yeah, that's important. So you became more full-time painter as you transitioned out. When I met you, you were showing at Klein Gallery. Was that your first gallery?
It was my first gallery in New Mexico.
In Santa Fe. Mm-hmm.
And Kim Wiggins, who's another New Mexican painter, is from Roswell. And he happened to be married to my little sister Valerie's best friend from high school.
Oh.
So we visited, like one of our trips to Roswell. And he had been with Jeff Klein for years. And he offered an introduction. And at this point, I was just doing group shows in Colorado. So he made the introduction. I went to meet Jeff Klein, showed him my portfolio, and he did a group show in the summer. I'm not good with years, but
Just
like maybe
back then.
97,
About 20 years ago.
98 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And it went good. And then the next one went good. And we had a couple of good runs. And then that was the sign. It was like, we got to go. We got to do it now or it won't happen. And one of the things that Jeff Klein taught me was to be a professional artist, you have to produce work. It's one thing to be a good artist that if I produce something great for you and I say, Leroy, here's this one painting I've worked on for 3 years, sell it. And you're like, I need a body of work, Jim. And that's what Jeff Klein taught me. You can't just be a good artist. You have to be a professional artist. You have to do this with a commitment to do a body of work and take it seriously. It's not a hobby. And the other thing that Jeff Klein taught me is about himself, and it was, I would rather sell dead artist art because two things.
Don't tell me ego is one of them.
Dead artists don't argue with the gallerist, and you don't have to split the commission with the dead artist. And he says, but I'll still show you. I didn't argue much with him. And I don't argue much with you.
Oh, we have a good relationship.
Yeah.
I try to give space.
So that was how we jumped ship basically from the commercial art world and sold our house in Colorado, moved down here into a drafty old Adobe and remodeled that, and then raised our kids here.
Was it Dixon?
It was in Dixon, right? Yeah.
Was it down by the schoolhouse?
Yeah, down on the old plaza. And now Sage lives down there and owns an old drafty Adobe on the plaza.
That's awesome.
So, like Klein, I worked with him or showed with him for 2 years, and he wanted to retire, Jeff Sr., and his son took over. And he didn't have the same passion and capacity. And Kristen, at the time, you were showing, your gallery was in Taos.
Yeah.
And you were really devoted to doing
the native stuff. Probably.
Yeah, native stuff, but also just, your Leroy Garcia is gonna have the best gallery, not just in Taos, but in New Mexico. You were not satisfied just to be called the Taos Gallery. You wanted, and you're good at it. So Kristen is saying, Jim, you should start looking around because this thing with Jeff Jr. is not going well. And I'm like, yeah.
You're loyal too. That's the problem, right? So.
And at the same time, she's working in Taos part-time at the tasting room under Ogilvy's, which is the Gorge Bridge.
Yeah.
Or the Gorge Bar.
That's been a long time.
So she would take her lunch break at the La Chiripada tasting room and walk over and walk through your gallery. And she'd come back and say, Blue Rain, they got some nice stuff. They're doing it good. And then Peter, and he likes to say he brought me to you to introduce.
I think it was Tony Abeta that did that.
Well, Tony was with Klein.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he went to you first.
Yeah.
And then, so Tony must have talked to Peter and you about it. Mm-hmm. And then Kristen talked to me about you guys. And then I actually called Tony and
that
said,
sounds like right about our major expansion in Taos where we took over the 2 stories of that one building.
Yeah. And then I called Tony and asked him, and he's like, he's basically said, you're driven to do the best you can, and they're a commercially successful gallery. And one of the things, like this is the advice to the future and up-and-coming artists, is you have to be careful of what I call vanity galleries. So there's people that love the art world so much that they'll buy themselves into a gallery because they want to either be an artist or they want to be a gallerist. And they just love that, the fun of it, you know, the openings and meeting artists and rubbing elbows and seeing beautiful art every day, but they have no idea how to run a gallery.
Oh, it's harder than it looks, that's for sure, and expensive.
and if they don't have to make money at it, they may not be that good at it.
Right.
And that's, to me, is a vanity gallery.
Yeah.
Whether they're driven by their own art.
There's a lot of those
They're
around.
So I wanted to be wary of that. And you know, like you and Peter came to the old Catholic school building. We sat and talked. It was kind of like a dance. It's like, what do you feel about this? You know, like what happens when this happens and that kind of thing. And we shook hands. We've never had a contract. People ask, you know, like, do you have a contract? It's like, no, like I agree with Leroy. We shook hands.
And if we have a disagreement, we talk about it.
And we talk about it.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's been what, 18 years?
It's been a journey, and it's I'm looking forward to the next 18.
Me too.
I think you're going to even more explode. I think you're obviously you've already been awarded the governor's award, but you are a treasure of New Mexico.
Oh, thank you.
Hope
Leroy.
you realize that. Well, I think that'll do for today. I'd like to thank everybody for watching Blue Rain's podcast. I'd like to encourage you to sign up if you can on YouTube or iTunes or wherever we're listed. If you're unsure where to go, you can always go to our website, BlueRainGallery.com, and go under our blog section, and you will find the podcast there. Jim, thank you for your time and your beautiful studio, and
thank you,
success
Leroy.
to your future.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you.